Greetings learners, my name is Chantal Oliphant and today I'd like to welcome you to our lesson on language structures. So without wasting any time, let's dig right in. Remember, we are doing reading and viewing, but we're looking particularly at language features as well as comprehension strategies. Now remember, the reason why we're including the comprehension strategies is because you need to read your questions, understand what you need to do, which is comprehending, and then respond to those questions, right? We're moving on. Let's break down the lesson. So language structures, we're going to focus on punctuation, grammar, as well as spelling and vocabulary. Now you know there are other features in language structures, but this lesson is going to focus on these three elements, okay? Now remember, what will you be able to do at the end of this lesson? What skills will you have? So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to apply grammar rules to set questions, respond to questions based on grammar. You will be able to use punctuation correctly, understand and identify aspects of spelling and vocabulary, identify techniques to respond to questions concerning spelling and vocabulary, and also you'll be analyzing as well as answering questions based on language structures. All right. Now, here's some keywords that you might encounter in the lesson that may be foreign to you. So let's go. Grammar, right? This is the set of rules for how a language is structured as shown by its speakers and writers. Now, you know, language can be heard as well, but remember your grammar rules are how the speakers or how it is speakers use it or how it is written, all right? Punctuation are those marks used in writing to separate sentences and their elements to clarify meaning. So you remember when you were much younger and you started your English, this is one of the first little aspects that teachers were trying to communicate, especially in language, okay? Then concord is the need for grammatical agreement between the different parts of speech in a sentence. So like your noun, your verb, your pronoun, okay? All of that needs to be an agreement, and if that happens, we call that concord, right? Then degrees of comparison, it's used to compare and contrast adjectives and adverbs in a positive, comparative, as well as a superlative manner. So I want you to take note, there's three ways in which we're going to do these comparisons. What are the common errors that learners encounter? Learners find it difficult to apply grammar rules to questions. They lack the skill to identify the grammar rule that is required for a particular question. They also lack the correct vocabulary to respond to questions pertaining to language structures. And then learners struggle to interpret the scope of what a language question requires. Also, learners require continued practice. So you need to put pen to paper if you want to learn your grammar rules. All right. Now, let's move on. What do you know? What do we assume that you know? That you know your rules for grammar and that you apply it when you're writing. You can comment on the effectiveness of punctuation as well as respond to questions. So at grade 12 level, we want you to identify, analyze, as well as evaluate those grammar rules and then continued practice so that you can respond to your questions based on grammar, punctuation, and vocabulary. Remember, for exam competency, you should be able to have critical thinking skills, time management, all right? Remember, when you are in an exam room, you are time bound. So make sure that you are managing your time. You must know your grammar rules, your rules for punctuation, must have reading skills and vocabulary to respond to the language questions that need to be addressed, all right? So we are taking a quick pause here. I will see you on the other side of the ad break. Learners, welcome back from your ad break. We will now be digging into punctuation. All right. Now remember, Many times learners are unable to identify the different grammar rules, and because of that, they find it difficult to respond to questions. Right, so our first segment is punctuation marks. Now remember, these are the signs and symbols we use in writing to clarify meaning. They separate sentences and their parts, all right? So this is where you need to pay attention. Their parts to help the reader to understand what we're saying, when we're saying it, and how we're saying it, all right? So there is a list of the punctuation marks that you may encounter in the examination question paper. Right, quickly, a definition for our punctuation. Remember, your full stop ends a sentence. Example, he's at school, mom cooks supper. It's a statement, all right, and it just is making a point, so it ends on a full stop. Your question mark ends a sentence that is a question. Now remember, statement sentence for the full stop, then the question sentence will end on a question mark. Are you well? All right. Can you see the lions? Note the tone of the voice when it is a question. Then your exclamation mark. This sentence is to express an outcry, an emotion, or urgency. Now let's look at my examples. Help, I'm stuck. All right. I want you to see the outcry, help. All right. Immediately, someone's going to pay attention because there's an outcry. Emotion, all right? What a beautiful day, okay? See how the voice is exclaimed. And then, ouch, the bee stung me. There's the urgency, okay? So those ones are going to need exclamation marks, brackets, to include an explanation or additional information. Now, please take note. My example is going to demonstrate that. I never want to see them. Now, the them might be unknown to the reader. So what the writer does is puts the information in brackets, that it's the neighbors, all right? So you get additional information included to make the sentence more understandable. Your comma separates part of a sentence. Now look at this one. His new hairstyle is, in my opinion, perfect for his face. So this sentence would have been complete without in my opinion. So we use our commas to show you that this is the additional part or the part that needs to be separated. Okay. Ellipsis is used to indicate omission or a pause. So I want you to see the pause in this case. My kitten, he's gone. So can you see the emotion coming through? And to show the emotion, we used a pause. But now remember that your ellipsis can also indicate an omission. She said that, ellipsis. So what did she say? The thought is incomplete, and therefore we use the ellipsis. Apostrophe indicates omission or possession. Now please take note, we can use it for letters and numbers, and many times learners fail to see that we can write, we are counting in twos, all right? So we need our apostrophe in that case. So when you encounter that in the exam, remember that is an apostrophe, all right? Now, this is Humpo's book. Can you see that this book belongs to Humpo and we're indicating it by using the apostrophe? In this case, there's the apostrophe for contraction, all right? In I am, shortened or contracted to I'm, okay? Then the hyphen connects compound words also to separate syllables. So look at the word ex-matriculans. Can you see we've taken two words that can stand on their own? Ex can stand on its own, matriculans can stand on its own. That is my ex, all right? I used to be married to him, no longer. But now, when we join it, ex-matriculans, we're forming a whole new word, and that is indicated by the hyphen. Okay, now let's see if we can use some of these in sentences. She bought flour, eggs, butter, sugar, and milk to bake the cupcakes. In your response, take note of the commas because it's indicating that there are parts that need to be separated, okay? Watch the inclusion of your full stop because it's a statement sentence, all right? In our second example, yes, I have seen her preparing for the tournament, all right? So you're going to say, what's needed? look in your response. See the comma after the affirmation for yes. So when we have a yes or a no affirmation, you need to include the comma. And then our full stop for our statement sentence. In my third example, Carmel says, I love reading comics. And you're going to say, but she already, whatever she said, it's in quotation marks. What do I need? Look at this. Carmel says, and there's a comma to introduce the direct speech. So don't forget about that one, okay? In our next examples, be quiet. No talking allowed in the exam venue. Already you've noticed a change in my voice, so look at the exclamation, all right, because you noted the tone. Kamu's dress is floral, but Bongi's dress is plain red, all right? I want you to see in the response, see how the apostrophe is indicating possession and our full stop is indicated there, right? Third sentence, do you need help to carry your parcels? All right, I want you to note the inclusion of the question mark, okay? So I'm sure that those examples are going to help you. Let's move on to our grammar segment of the lesson. And remember, many times learners lack sound grammar rules. Now, because of that, there's this difficulty to respond to questions, all right? So you need to practice. You need to gain competence in your grammar rules. So remember, it is a system. Grammar is a system and a structure of language, right? And the rules that govern the composition of words, phrases, and sentences. So we're going to do two aspects, question tags and concord. So question tags are short phrases that are added to the end of a statement to turn it into a question. Take note, question tags, all right? Now remember, it is for agreement or for confirmation, all right? So yes, I agree, or I'm confirming that this will happen. Concord, on the other hand, is the agreement and consistency in the parts of a sentence. Mostly, the agreement is for the subject and for the verb. And look at my lovely curls I'm indicating it with. Question tags, that's going to be our first segment that we're going to focus on. Remember, when your statement has a verb in the negative, the tag must have the verb in the positive, which is this one that we're focusing on here. The tag in the statement must have the verb in the same tense. That's very important, okay? The verb in the negative for the tag is written as a contraction, all right? And we're going to see that when we look at our example. Place a comma, very important, before you start your tag. The singular pronoun is used for a singular subject and a plural pronoun will be used for a plural subject. So look at the singular, singular, plural, plural. So you have a combination that needs to match. And then the tag always ends with a question mark. So in our examples, we see, all right, the positive statement, but then the tag has a negative, all right? And then your example says, you are a learner, aren't you? All right, so can you see how you tag your question? And then in the negative statement, we have a positive tag question. John isn't a policeman, is he? All right, so take note of how the little red circles indicate your pronoun. So can you see singular, singular there as well. John, singular, so we go singular for he. But now look at Mary, she's female, so it's she for the female part, and it's singular, all right? Now here we have a plural pronoun, and then we follow through with a plural pronoun here. So remember, where S is your singular, all right? And then P will be for plural. And my pen is not doing what it must do, and there we go, all right? So let's look at tag questions. Nelson Mandela was a great leader. You have studied all week, and in our responses, we're going to identify, look, there's your comma, there's your contraction, and there is your question mark. So we've complied with all the rules, okay? You've studied all week, haven't you? And then all of those have been fulfilled as well, okay? In our next set of questions, The senior citizens were treated special. He didn't always feel this way. In our response, we see the senior citizens were treated special, weren't they? So senior citizens, plural, and then they links to the plural part of the senior citizens. I'm going to indicate it with a P. He didn't always feel this way, did he? All right, so there we have an example where your statement is negative, but your tag is positive. All right, so there's a perfect example of your tag questions. Now, moving on to concord. All right, remember, concord is the agreement of subject and verb. Okay, now we can have your pronoun also included in concord, all right? Don't miss that. So let's quickly look at singular subjects, which is this little block there. The tall boy, can you see there's only one of them? My aging grandmother, one. Now here is where a little nick comes in. The herd of cattle. Now remember, this is many cattle. However, the word herd makes all of that group of cattle, it makes it one group, okay? So therefore, your collective noun is usually a singular subject, okay? Plural subject, remember we indicated with and, with the words both, those, and these, and then all. Usually, when your plural subject is indicated in a sentence, it will use those identifiables, all right? When we're moving on to our examples, because we're going to amend the concord in these sentences. His younger brothers walked to school, but Sipho traveled to school by taxi. Now, I want you to take note. Can you see? When we have in our response, we see the brothers walk, but Sipho travels. See the S for the singular subject, all right? In my next sentence, we identify, unfortunately, the taxi fares is becoming expensive. And remember, we want agreement between the subject and the verb. So in my response, the taxi fares, plural, are becoming instead of is becoming, all right? And in my last sentence, it says, Sipho need a Saturday job to afford this high fares, all right? And in my response, I see that Sipho, because it's a singular subject, he needs a job to afford these, all right? Can you see the high fares? It's plural, so I need a plural to indicate a plural pronoun there to indicate that the fares are very high. Okay, learners, that brings us to an ad break. I will see you shortly. Learners, welcome back from the ad break. We will now be digging into spelling and vocabulary. So let's move right ahead. Learners are unable to tabulate the degrees of comparison. They cannot use the correct rules for singular and plural, and they are unable to respond to questions related to spelling. Now, you may use marks when you are unable to do any of those things that we've just mentioned for you. So you need to practice those skills, okay? So in our spelling and vocabulary segment, we're going to look at degrees of comparison, and also we're looking at singular and plural. So remember, degrees of comparison is the listing of the positive, comparative, and superlative. Now remember, there are three categories in which we are going to compare a noun or a verb, all right? And we're going to dig into that later as we progress. Singular and plural, where singular means one, all right? Plural means many, okay? So I'm sure that that is something that you're quite familiar with. So let's dig in quickly. Our degrees of comparison, all right? So what are degrees of comparison? We have the positive, which is the first one. Then we have the comparative. Then we have the superlative. So if you're looking at the table, can you see that as we're moving towards number 3, it becomes strengthened in intensity, all right? So in the positive, there's no comparison. The entities are equal in status, and the adjective or the adverb stays in its pure form, like tall, pretty, good, or diplomatic. However, when you get to the comparative, comparing, then we have two things, all right? And they are not equal in status, so therefore we have taller, prettier, better, or more diplomatic, all right? Now, in the comparative, take note of the ER that we are adding in there, all right? So there's a plus ER for the comparative. Now look at the superlative, the most intense form, all right? So when we get here, okay, there are more than two things. So therefore we can't say we have to say est, all right? So in this case, we're going to say plus EST, all right? And I'm going to make a little cloud around it so it makes sense. So tallest, prettiest, best, or most diplomatic. Now, we're going to break down this a little bit better for you in our next segment. So look at this, right? When you have your positive, remember, positive, it's in its pure form. Comparative is taking it to ER, but it's comparing two things, and then we go to the superlative, which is your most intense form, and this is where we can compare more than three things. So in our responses, we see great becomes greater, greatest. Now, look at the words ending on Y, all right? Can you see the Y is dropped in your answer there? For easier and easiest, we replace it with an I. Flat, flatter, flattest. So when we have a single vowel sound, see what's happening to your consonant. We double that consonant there. Painful. Now because we have more than two syllables in our word, pain plus full, all right? So we can't say painfuller and painfulest. We say more painful and most painful. Interesting? Interesting. Look at our amount of syllables. So it's more interesting, most interesting. Now these are the exceptions, all right? These are the ones that you just can't break down into ER and EST. Good, better, best. Bad, worse, worst. And then many, more, most, little, less, least. Okay, so you need to watch out for those exceptions to the rule. So let's see if we can apply this to sentences. Dylan is tall, but Trent is, take note, there's 1, 2. So this is a comparative, all right? And in our response, taller, okay? Now, she has the beautiful voice as a lead singer. So we don't know how many of them there are, and therefore it is most beautiful voice, all right? So I'm giving you hints of how you need to address this when you get to your question paper. Tandi knits quick, Lebo knits quicker, but Lindy knits the quickest. So now we see the ER and the EST. These roads have potholes, but those have fewer potholes, all right? So the few there is linked to the fewer on my comparative side. Debbie drives a fast car. Kim's car is faster, but Amy's car is the fastest, or Amy drives the fastest car, all right? So I want you to see how your comparative and superlative works. Now, moving on to singular and plural. So there are many rules that you can apply to your singular and plural words, all right? So let's begin at the beginning. Number 1 says, simply add an S. So this one you're very familiar with, all right? When a word ends on a Y, we drop the Y, then we add IES to make it plural. Some words only have a plural form. Thank God for those, but you need to identify them, okay? If a word ends on F, all right, or in FE, change it to V or VE to form the plural, all right? So we're covering that base. Some words have irregular plurals, which means some of them don't comply with the rules. So we're going to look for those examples later. If a word ends on S, Z, X, SH, or CH, then we simply add ES, all right, to those word endings. Now remember, it's the word ending, not in the middle of the word or center of the word. If a word ends on O, then add ES to make it plural. So C, we've covered 7 rules, all right? Now, in our examples, when we're adding an S, there we go, toys, windows, cups, roads. When we drop the Y, dictionaries, butterflies, parties, currencies, all right? Some words only have a plural form. There we have it. Trousers, sheep, fish, scissors, deer, shrimp. We don't say shrimps or deers or scissors, all right? It even sounds crazy, doesn't it? So remember, some words only have a plural form. Then if a word ends on F or VE, there we go. It is shelves, loaves, knives, lives, all right? Let's move on. Some words have irregular plurals. Here we go. All right? Goose becomes geese, tooth, teeth, mouse, mice. Let me just add here quickly. If you are doing cat or IT, remember, you can't say mice, all right? You will say if there's one mouse, all right, that little thing that you click around, it will still remain mouses, but that's only for cat and IT, all right? Then, if it ends on any of those, we just add an ES. Look at your benches, flashes, waltzes, guesses, quizzes, all right? And then when a word ends on an O, banjos, potatoes, mosquitoes. Now, let's see. We have a paragraph, and we need to change the plural nouns to the singular form. Now, your plural nouns have already been highlighted for you. So the people that attended the concerts at the theatres were all given gift vouchers to thank them for taking the time to support the fundraising events. The children who sat on the benches received dictionaries and tubs of fresh strawberries, all right? Now, let's see. People, person, all right? So I want you to see in examination settings, this is the kind of examples that you will be given in order for you to change your singular to plural, or in this passage, the plural to the singular. So you need to take note of your rules and how to apply them. So our first question says, correct the single error in each of the following sentences. Write only the question numbers and the words that you've corrected. Now, please take note. These instructions are very important because remember, if you're writing too much information, you are not going to be able to finish on time. So make sure that you read your instruction very carefully. All right. So our first question says, the Link Literacy Project are in need of volunteers. So somewhere in this sentence, there is a single error. And in our response, it shows you that the word are should have actually been is. And remember, in this instance, your single error is looking at Concord, all right? So we're looking at Concord Agreement there. 1.2, it is estimate that most South African children have lost learning time. So just by reading it, you should have picked up there's something missing in that sentence. And in our response, it says the word estimate should be estimated. Okay, so there's my error. So we're looking at, in this case, we've identified that the tense was not correct in that sentence. 1.3, a little effort will go a long way. Okay, I've already hinted to the response. A little effort will go the long way to helping children, all right? So in our response, it says the should actually be a. That word there is wrong, so our definite article was incorrect for this sentence. So in this case, remember we are looking at the grammar error, okay? 1.4, she added, many of our children live in challenging environments. So now you're going to say, but I see everything there. What could possibly be wrong? In this case, look at our response. The word challenging was not spelled correctly. So in this case, we were looking at the spelling error. Okay, now remember they asked you for a single error in each sentence. Okay. In 1.2, complete the following tag question. Write only the missing words, all right? Now take note, they only want you to write the missing words, so they've given you the entire statement. The children need to be able to read to make their way through this education system, all right? Now you must change it into a question, and in our response, we see don't they, all right? Because can you see that your children here is plural, all right? And because it's plural, we have to have the word they and not he or she. Mary is a volunteer that is so dedicated, all right? Now, can you see that Mary is a female? So here we see the she to indicate, the tag is going to indicate that the gender is identified as a female, all right? So they've already given you the question mark in the examination question paper, so you might not need to include those, all right? You were interested in being a volunteer, weren't you? All right, now take note, there's the you and it matches in my tag, okay? I want you to understand that you need to include the apostrophe for contraction when you are doing your tag questions. Those are very, very vital, okay? In 1.3, rewrite the following sentences and insert the missing punctuation mark. So there's a punctuation mark missing, all right? And you know your punctuation marks, commas, full stop, exclamation, questions, all right? So fairy tales are well-known stories that inspire children's creativity. And now you're going to say, but I see a punctuation mark, so what can possibly be missing? Let's see what they identify in our response. Fairy tales are well-known stories. So we needed a hyphen to make that a compound word, all right? No, I'll never kiss a frog. And you're going to say again, but what do they need? I see a punctuation mark already. In our response, no. Remember, our comma needs to follow after a yes or no affirmation. Wow, what a colorful worm. All right, already by the reading, wow, what a colorful worm. Look at the exclamation in my voice, and there we see it identified in our response, okay? Do you know where a princess plays? All right, can you denote from my reading that we need a question mark, all right? So that was 4 easy marks in the bag for you. 1.4, give the singular form of the underlined words. Now you know singular form, it's when it's one. Plural, it's when it's more than one. So in this case, they're telling you in the question, look at the underlined words only. So we're not looking for the other words, all right? We look at the underlined words in the sentence. In this case, it's adventures, parties, banjos, butterflies, all right? How do we know this is the plural form? Can you see the S at the end? So it shows you it's more than one. So what are you going to do? You must make it one only. So in our response, we see adventures become adventure, all right? Now remember parties, can you see the IES? Shows you that your Y was changed to IES for the plural, but in the singular, you only need the letter Y. Banjos, all right? It ends on an O, so we add ES in the plural, but in the singular, we drop that. And then in butterflies, we see the IES replaced by the letter Y for butterfly. Okay, so another set of easy marks in the bag for you. All right, let's go to question 1.5. Complete the following sentence by filling in the missing words. Write only the word next to the question numbers. Now, I want you to take note that this question is focusing on degrees of comparison. All right? Now, how do you know that? I want you to take note that you are looking at your least, most, sweeter, better, less, more, good, sweetest. And remember, when you're looking at degrees of comparison, all right, when we're looking at degrees of comparison, you can see technology is not my friend today, huh? Your degrees of comparison looks at your positive, comparative, and superlative, all right? Where your comparative compares two things, and the superlative is the most intense form where you can look at 3 or more aspects that's being compared. So in this case, some princesses are, so look, can you see some princesses? So already you can see there's more than just 2. So some princesses are more playful, and there we have our answer indicated, than others. When you meet a princess, you will see that some of them are sweet, but others are sweeter. Okay, the comparative form being used. It will be good to buy your princess a frilly dress, but it will be better to get the crown to go with it. That will be, okay, so it can either be, you can either use the word least or most. And can you see that this is the superlative form now? That is the least you can do for your princess, or that will be the most you can do for your princess, all right? So we looked at degrees of comparison and we applied them in sentences that, that the question required. Learners, that takes us to an ad break. I will see you shortly. Learners, welcome back. We will now be delving into some more practice questions based on language structures. All right, let's move on. 1.1. Correct the single error in each of the following sentences. Write only the answer, the question number, as well as the words that you've corrected. All right, so remember, very important because you have time boundaries in an examination setting. Okay, so let's go. 1.1, gratitude is much more than just saying please and thank you. All right. Now, I want you to take note. I'm going to read the sentences and then I want you to see if you can work this out on your own before we get to the responses. All right. It is something you feel, a loving and positive response, acknowledging the things and people we are lucky enough to experience. Every child are taught to say please and thank you from a young age. Studies suggest that grateful teenagers are much satisfied with their lives. So remember, I've read the sentences to you. Now let's see if we can break them down and find where those single errors are. Okay. So in our first sentence, gratitude is much more than. All right. Now remember, this is a very common error that learners tend to make. Instead of saying than, all right, with the sound, they say then with an sound. So remember, this is looking at our spelling. So in this first sentence, they wanted you to identify the spelling error. Let's move on to 1.2. Now remember, in our sentence when we read it, we had a little issue with the word respond, okay? So let's look at our response and see what it identifies, all right? The word should be response instead of respond, all right? Again, we've identified that the tense was wrong there for that sentence, all right? In my next sentence 1.3, every child are taught, all right, to say please and thank you. Now remember, this is a singular child, and remember, are is for plural. So in this case, the child are should be the child is, all right? And in my next sentence, studies suggest that grateful teenagers are much satisfied, all right? Now remember, it should be more satisfied because we're looking at degrees of comparison, all right? And when something is, something goes in the comparative, we use the ER ending. And in this case, because of the syllables in satisfied, it's more than 2, so we add more satisfied to complement that syllables, all right? Complete the following tag question. Now look at your instruction, it says tag question, and in this case you write only the missing words, which means that you must change the statement, all right, and make it negative by adding the tag question. So let's see. Grateful teenagers also tend to support others emotionally, and in our response we see don't they. Now please take note, can you see teenagers? This is plural, all right, and we've indicated that with the they because they is more than one, all right? She shows gratitude to those around her. Now, I want you to take note, the pronoun here is she, and we've kept it she in the tag question as well. Nelson Mandela taught others to be kind. All right. Now, we know Nelson Mandela is a male figure, so there we have the he to indicate that. Now, something that I want to remind you of, remember, in our tag, we always have to use the contraction. Okay, so it's don't, doesn't, and didn't. And we indicate it by using our apostrophe. Moving on, 1.3. Provide the correct degree of comparison. There we go. All right. Now remember your degrees of comparison: positive when the word is in its pure form, comparative when it becomes a little more intensified with only two things being compared, and then superlative, most intensified. All right. And it's more than 3 in the comparison. So showing gratitude is important than material possessions. And in our response, we see more important, all right? Now, why more? We can't say important, importanter, importantest. Because we have more, look at your syllables there, all right? And because of the syllables, we have to have more to indicate the comparative, all right? In 1.3, forgiveness is best than hatred. The correct comparison there would be better. Okay, now this is the unusual one. This is the one that you just have to know. Okay, and children learn to say please and thank you from a younger age. And in this case, the correction is young. Okay, because we want it in its most pure form. And then for 1.3.4, the lucky parents are those who have grateful children. So the luckiest. Look at the EST for your superlative form. Okay. And remember what happens to your Y? It falls away and we replace it with an I, and then we add EST to show you that this is in the superlative form, all right? The most intense degree of comparison. In question 1.4, rewrite the following sentences and insert the missing punctuation. Now, please take note, we are looking for punctuation marks, and you recall your comma, your hyphen, exclamation, question mark, all right, your brackets, all of those are coming into contention for this question. So let's go. 1.4.1. Showing gratitude has a positive influence on people's friendships. All right. Now, if you look at your response, you can see the word people's. We've included a apostrophe to show that these people have friendship. All right. So it's showing the possession there using the apostrophe. In 1.4.2, teach children to respect the elderly, greet and say please and thank you. And in our response, we see we need a comma after the word elderly, which we're going to insert there. And why is that? Because can you see that this is one part of the sentence and then we have a follow-up part after the comma, all right? So to separate the ideas in the sentence, we've inserted a comma there, all right? In 1.4.3, how are you feeling today? So can you see what's happening to my voice? It's going into a question mode. So when we look at our response, after the word today, we have to complete it with a question mark, all right? To indicate that we are posing a question to someone that we're talking to. In 1.4.4, gosh, that deed was really kind, all right? Now, I want you to hear what happened to my voice on the word gosh. There's an exclamation. It went slightly louder. And because of that, it's indicated with the exclamation mark. Okay, so I'm sure these questions are going to be really handy when you need to revise your punctuation marks. Give the singular form for the underlined words. Now, please, you are not, remember, your question becomes very vital in the exams. So it only asks for the singular form of the underlined words. So don't look at other words in the sentence. So the underlined words here are children, people, firefighters, and lives. So these words need to be written in the singular form. So here in the sentence, it appears in the plural form, more than one. So now we're looking for the singular form, which children becomes child. Now remember, this is the unusual plural words, all right? We don't apply any plural rules here like adding an ES or adding an S. People, this is also an unusual one, becomes person. Firefighters, okay, becomes firefighter. So don't be put off by the hyphen there, all right? Just note that because you have one firefighter, you'll have more than one firefighters, okay? And in lives, remember your rule here, the F is being replaced by the letter V, and then we add ES. So their lives will become life, okay? So we've applied our rules for making it singular and plural. Learners, this is where we go to an ad break. I will see you soon. Learners, welcome back. We will now be wrapping up our session and reviewing what we've covered, all right? So remember, we focused on language features in this lesson, and we also focused on comprehension skills. Now remember, the reason why we included comprehension skills is because you had to read your question, comprehend or understand what you're reading in order to respond to the questions that is being posed to you, all right? Remember, we covered in language structures, we looked at punctuation and the different rules that we had to apply there and the different punctuation marks that we used. In grammar, all right, we covered our aspects there, and in spelling and vocabulary, we looked at the different rules of how to do our singular and plural. Then the keywords that we used in our lesson were grammar, and remember this is a set of rules, okay, of how language is structured, remember by speakers as well as writers, okay. Punctuation, remember how we applied the rules of punctuation for separating sentences in order to clarify meaning. We also looked at concord, this is the agreement of subject and verb in a sentence particularly, and then our degrees of comparison, looked at the comparison and contrasting of adjectives as well as adverbs. And remember, there were 3 areas that we focused on, the positive, the comparative, and the superlative. Okay. Remember, our critical common errors that we're dealing with is that learners find it difficult to apply grammar rules to questions. All right? They lack the skill to identify the grammar rule required for a particular question. They lack the correct vocabulary to respond to questions pertaining to language structures, as well as learners struggling to cope with the scope of what the language question requires. And then learners require continued practice in language activities, which means that you need to take your language activities and constantly work through the different aspects that you need to cover. So the more you practice, the more skilled you become at applying those grammar rules. All right. Now, for exam writing, what am I going to need? I'm going to need my critical thinking skills. I'm going to need time management. Remember, your exam is time bound, so you need to make sure that you answer all the questions in that specific amount of time. You need to apply grammar rules, punctuation rules, and you need the vocabulary to respond to the language question given to you. And remember, reading skills is of paramount importance. In order to understand what you need to respond to, you need to read your question very, very carefully. Okay. Now, we have identified question papers that will help you to practice your skills, all right? Remember, the more you practice, the more you hone the skill, all right? The more you become used to the exam questions, how they are stated in the question paper, and that exposure is going to allow you to perform so much better when you start working through past question papers, all right? Those give you the kind of confidence that you need when you step into the exam room and you have to deal with the issues confronted you are confronted with in your question paper. Learners, we are at the end of our session. I want to thank you for joining me, all right? And we're hoping that these tips and these hints and the little practice activities that we've gone through is going to help you when you deal with your question papers in the exam setting. I want to wish you well, and I hope that you will join me next time.